The Edmonton Oilers closed out their latest three-game road trip with back-to-back wins over the Arizona Coyotes and the Vegas Golden Knights as they get set to play 8 of their next 10 here at Rogers Place, as we're pleased to welcome you to the panel presented by Sportsnet. You know Jack Michaels, you know Bob Stauffer. I'm Tony Brar. Bob, the Oilers are off to their second-best start in franchise history at the 20-game mark. They're 15-5, but they faced their fair bit of challenges along the way, specifically on the back end. All three guys on the left-hand side were out from 2 weeks ago. How do you characterize their response to this adversity?
Well, I think that we're seeing a couple things, and let's not forget Mike Smith has basically not been available since the third game of the season. In theory, he's the team's number one goaltender. And then of recent, Darnell Nurse and Duncan Keith and Slater Cuckoo being out. And I think it speaks volumes of that Edmonton's got added depth. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those depth pieces up front that played a significant factor in the victory in Vegas. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the team's 15-5. It has the best winning percentage in the Western Conference in the National Hockey League. And I think most Oilers fans would suggest they'd probably be pretty happy with the start.
I think one of the reasons is the increased depth that some assumed would come entirely from outside the organization. Guys like Duncan Keith and Zach Hyman and Warren Foegele that were added to the roster. Now that has helped, but guys like Philip Broberg, who, in my opinion, has probably played as well as anyone could have expected him to play in his first 4 or 5 NHL games. He's played him in a rocking chair, and I am loath to start making characterizations of what this guy could be, but to me, he looks a lot like Ryan Suter. And when he does make a mistake, it's out of aggression. You know, he gets walked by Shea Theodore the other day, comes right back and ends up playing a season high in minutes and never rattled him for a moment. So when I see a young player play, I look at to see how he responds to the odd mistake and whether he goes away. And Philip Broberg hasn't gone away at all. And so not only is there depth coming from outside the organization, but now it's starting to push up from inside the organization. And to his credit, when they got beat up a little bit further, William Lagesson has stepped in a couple games, no problem. Now that's testament to what Jay Woodcroft, of course, is constructed in Bakersfield, but it's also testament to those players being able to fall out of bed, enter a lineup where you're getting the opposition's best game every night and not missing a beat.
So you can take it one step further. Stuart Skinner coming in, a guy, and I think Stuart Skinner and Philip Broberg were here earlier maybe than the Oilers were planning on having those guys here. I have a slight difference and certainly in terms of Skinner. I think it's exciting for Oilers fans because there's been very few goaltender prospects pan out, and he's tracking right now like a guy who's got a chance to be a pretty decent goaltender long term for Edmonton. I see more Jay Bouwmeester than Ryan Suter, just because of his skating ability. And also, I think Ryan might have had a higher, I'm not sure where Broberg's offensive ceiling is. I mean, we're 4 games or 5 games in. I don't want to limit him, but Jay sort of had a ceiling to that offensive upside. And to me, Suter, the skating, I think that's why. But a good comparison, I mean, if he can come out somewhere between a Bouwmeester or a Suter, that's a world-class Olympic.
Suter had 8 times 40 points.
Right.
It's not like he can't do it.
No, I'm saying he had a higher ceiling than Bouwmeester. So, and even Ryan McLeod, a guy that you've loved for years, we've loved since the first training camp. I mean, Ryan's come in and taken a step here. Those are organic solutions to some of the Oilers' challenges on top of the external solutions that came in. I don't think you can underscore Zach Hyman. Like, just in terms of the relentlessness, the drive, playing in every situation. Far be it for us to make a comment on the culture in the room, but I would suggest, based on our own personal dealings with him, he's got to be a pretty positive guy to have around the group, Jack. So I'm a big Hyman guy as well. I think he's made a real impact.
And while we're mentioning what Jay Woodcroft has done in Bakersfield, I think we've got to start giving Dave Tippett some props. I mean, let's take a look at what he's done in the last 2 games. He decides to load up McDavid, Draisaitl, and Cassian. And Cassian has his first 3-point game in 2 years, and the top line combines for 11 points. Then against Vegas, without their number 2 centerman, William Karlsson, where you could have very easily gone back to that line that just put up 11 points for you, he breaks him up again. Hyman comes off the schneid. Bob said, McLeod's been going, so has Warren Foegele, who's been in and around the net. They get Jesse Puljujärvi off the schneid. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins scores, and again, when it came down to making the right decision in net, and it was a tough decision. A lot of people thought they might have gone with Stuart Skinner. He decides to go right back with Mikko Koskinen. Now, why did he do that? Well, maybe it's because, all right, Mikko hasn't had great starts, so he starts him against Arizona, builds his confidence up. Koskinen played great. Last 5 minutes got away from the entire team, and Koskinen comes in and gives them the first 30 minutes they desperately needed against a Vegas club that was trying to send a message. Instead, it's Edmonton that sends the message, Edmonton that's perfect inside the division, and I think it's time to give the coach a little bit of a nod for that.
A lot of topics you guys touched up on there, but Bob, what can you say about Mikko Koskinen? He'll be the first to tell you he had a tough year last year, but bounces back with an 11-2 record. That's the second best start by a goaltender, if I'm not mistaken, in franchise history, other than Grant Fuhr.
Yeah, well, I mean, 917 to 899. You knew he was going to come up. I mean, he's 907, 908 in his career. It was inevitable he was going to have a bit of a bounce back. And one more further thing, just related to what Jack was talking. I mean, you need goaltending, and you need special teams to win. And a great reflection for how you assess your coaching is special teams. And the Oilers have the best combined special teams in the National Hockey League. Now, obviously, obviously they are obscenely gifted in terms of what they can do in the power play because they got the two best offensive players in the world on that team. But it's the penalty killing that's taken such a dramatic improvement under this coaching staff.
And with a personnel overhaul on the PK unit.
Especially at forward. Like, I mean, so we're seeing, and there's little tweaks. Like you saw Sevier a little bit more than Yamamoto on the PK in Vegas because there was some leakage once in a while with Ryan. So Derek Ryan's maybe not been where he's wanted to be 5-on-5, but he's been an effective penalty killer, can win draws. He's the right shot. Colton Sevier comes in, just a smart guy to bring in on a PTO. Probably been the best of the fourth line kind of wingers that have been in and out of the lineup. So they got some options there. But to me, I'm with Jack. Like that, the special teams is, I know we look at personnel. I think you got to look at coaching in terms of the tactical and technical approach.
You guys also talked about the depth of this team right now. Jack, you kind of touched up on it. Jesse Puljujarvi gets off the schneid, his first goal in 9 games on Saturday night. And Tippett said post-game that he wants to maybe see how he plays with a guy like Ryan McLeod because he wants to add more balance to the lineup. If those two guys can get going on that third line alongside Warren Foegele, that's a pretty deep lineup up front.
Well, and Fogel's been in and around it the last few games, too. He's knocking on the door. He would be next guy up in terms of a guy, breaking a bit of a drought. And again, I think one of the reasons why Dave Tippett likes using Jesse Puljujarvi with Ryan McLeod is he knows that Jesse Puljujarvi is going to have to keep his feet moving. And that's where he's most effective because he eats up so much space with those giant strides when he's going. And we saw that early in the season. He's as good a skater as there is on the club. And I would suggest this. Were it not for Connor McDavid, Ryan McLeod would be the fastest skater on this team. So they've got some depth of speed. They've got some depth of grit with guys like McLeod and Hyman and Foegele that are driving things. And Bob mentioned something very curious on the fourth line is Colton Sevier all of a sudden has made himself, he's kind of this year's Devin Shore. All of a sudden, you can't live with this guy out of the lineup anymore. He's making Dave Tippett's life impossible. He's got to put him in. So we've seen Sevier at center. We've seen him at wing. And that's another kind of two-headed monster down the middle where you've got two guys on every line who can take draws when you need it.
You talked about Ryan McLeod. You've been bullish on him in the last few training camps, always tweeting about his skating ability. So definitely coming to fruition for head coach Dave Tippett right now. You also talked about grit, Bob. We've gone, I don't know how many minutes it's been on this panel presented by Sportsnet, but we haven't talked about Chris Russell and him breaking the all-time block shots record since the league started recording the statistic in 2007. Tippett said post-game, 6 of 10 of those, maybe not so much. 4 of 10 block shots, they really, really hurt, and he's done 2,000 of them.
Well, I know analytics guys, the hardcore ones that maybe didn't necessarily grow up with the game every step of the way, don't have a real appreciation for the art of shot blocking. It's become an enhanced part of the game. There's an expectation today that everybody blocks shots, and it's more about getting in lanes, but it's also about sacrifice. And if you want to see a drop-off in defensemen that are late in their career, usually it happens from guys that aren't willing to do that as much. They kind of get out of the way of the lane. So
you can thank your buddy John Tortorella for that.
Yeah, well, my good friend John. Hey, if I ever had to go to a battle, I'd want John to go with me, and sometimes even in opposition dressing rooms. So, but I digress for a second. Anyhow, I mean, Russell is what Russell is, right? Like, he's a serviceable third pair. He's played really good here of late. Like, he's
golden savior on the back end. He can fall out of bed and play defense. And you know what you're getting from him, and there's no variance. In other words, you're not going to get a poor game out of a guy like that, and that's what makes him so valuable.
And he's just another guy that can kill penalties on the back end because of his willingness to absorb the pain. I mean, I'm the guy that used to yell at guys once I got past 20 and we go out and skate. Like, what are you doing getting in front of the puck? Just get out of the way. Somebody might get hurt that way, but for these, it still hurts, and I think it takes an immense amount of courage, and it's why he's in the league at 34 years of age.
Well, the Edmonton Oilers are set to play, as mentioned off the top of this panel, 8 of the next 10 here at Rogers Place. They host Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins on Wednesday. For Jack, Bob, I'm Tony, signing off for the panel.
Is that a big game?
It's a big game.
Big game.